Good evening. I'm Liza Morehouse. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees here at Morven, and on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the staff, I would like to welcome you to From Mansion to Museum. We are very fortunate to be joined tonight by a panel of speakers representing both private and public spheres who were instrumental in preserving Morven for future generations. You may know Morven was deeded to the state in 1954 by Walter Edge, with the proviso that it be retained as a governor's residence or a museum. So from there, we're going to go to the time and put this in context for you to 1982. Governor Byrne, who was then governor, approached the New Jersey Historical Society with a plan. It was apparent that New Jersey's governor's mansion, Morven, was becoming too rundown and restrictive in size for its operations as a state residence. If the Historical Society could come up with $4 million to restore Morven and then renovate and furnish Drumthwacket as the new governor's mansion, the state would allow the organization to use this home as an outpost in central New Jersey. Although the society did fulfill these requirements and moved into Morven, it gave up its lease in 1986 and returned the home to the state under the aegis of the New Jersey State Museum. For many years, Morven remained mostly dormant, only opening on Wednesdays for tours. The State Museum commissioned and completed 3 pivotal reports at the site during this time: a documentation of the history, an architectural investigation, and an archaeological survey. Interest in Morven was renewed under the administration of Governor Christine Todd Whitman with a reinvigorated Friends group led by Georgie T. Schley, one of tonight's panelists. The Friends group, Historic Morven, Inc., created a phased restoration plan and was essential in fundraising and garnering grant support to make restoration possible. In 2004, 20 years ago, Morven officially opened to the public as a museum. A core group of staff and board members established a mission, exhibitions, educational programming, and more, all shaping the organization into what it is today. A friendly reminder that tonight you can purchase our brand new Arcadia book that captures Morven's 265 plus years of history and was written by our own curators, Beth Allen and Jessie Gordon-Simons. This is just a brief overview of this important period in Morven's history. We have the pleasure tonight of hearing from just some of the amazing individuals who made this all possible. I would like to take one little moment to step back a bit and recall that this May, we honored Georgie Schley for her many years of service and her remarkable contribution. And I would just like to read the little dedication that was read to her at Morven in May. Georgie Schley is the bedrock of Morven. Her contributions and efforts significantly predate the opening of the museum, and indeed the museum would not be what it is today without her. After the formation of Historic Morven, Inc. as a Friends group in 1987, there were various efforts at organization and fundraising to make best use of this historic building. But it was not until the early 90s with Georgie in leadership that progress truly started. Georgie had full endorsement and crucial connections to the support of Whitman administration, and Morven began to thrive. Under her leadership, Morven assembled a strong and dedicated board of trustees, orchestrated the procedures and policies needed to support staff, and began to craft and realize a vision of Morven as an important museum for New Jersey with an important national role. Georgie and that early board of trustees were steadfast and consistent through Morven's early days, and that long-term commitment was the key. It took over 10 years to bring Morven to a condition to open as a museum, but Georgie did not dust her hands and turn away. She stayed in leadership and continued to shepherd Morven as an ever-evolving player and significant historic site, setting and realizing new goals and reimagining new visions. Georgie's ongoing diligent efforts at fundraising, friend-raising, outreach, and support are unmatched in Morven's history. And we're very, very lucky that Georgie is here with us tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's program, Clare Smith. Clare's career at Morven spans 16 years, beginning in 2000 as assistant director, and later in 2008 as executive director for an additional 8 years. During her tenure, Renovations were completed on the historic mansion, the carriage house, the pool house, and the fountain. She was actively involved in the planning stages of the Stockton Education Center. Clare lives in Princeton with her husband Tim and Jack Russell Terrier Shyla, and is a grandmother to an adorable and amazing 7-year-old girl. Thank you, Clare.
Thank you, Liza. Well, it's great to be back. I walk here often. As Liza said, I live in town, so I come back often, but not in this official capacity. And as Anne Gossen and I just said when we saw each other, it's like time just kind of disappeared for those years. So I think how we'll start, Georgie, would you like to say any more about yourself? Introduce yourself to the audience, and then we can pass it to Anne and to Carol. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I came to Morven via the garden club. I think there's 3 garden clubs that had given Morven a grant to do to hire professionals to see what had been done in the Stockton garden and what they thought that could be done. And that had evolved into some sort of dispute. And I can't remember exactly why. But so I was head of the house and garden tour for our garden club, which had been one of the 3 to originally support the garden at Morven. And so we had some money, and I came down, we wanted to give it to Morven. And I took one look at Morven, this beautiful house and this garden. I said, my gosh, nobody knows this exists. I mean, England thrives on house and garden tours, and this is the Garden State. This has got to be something special. So that's how I came to.
Georgie always had the vision. She kept that vision in her head steadfastly. Well,
New Jersey does such a terrible job of advertising itself.
Yeah.
And I married into a family that thinks New Jersey's the #1 state in the country.
Anne, would you like to go next?
Great. Here we go.
Actually, I didn't introduce you.
No.
Yeah, I have to introduce you. This is Anne Gossen. She worked here during my tenure as well. She is now a nonprofit and arts consultant and former curator of exhibitions and academic and artistic director at Morven. It was a very long title for a job that had a lot of duties, let me tell you.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I would also like to echo what Liza and Claire have said about Georgie. Just an amazing, I love that the commendation starts with the word bedrock, because you really were, Georgie.
Oh, my.
This, yes. So I wanted to add that. I came to Morven because I was wrapping up my master's degree at Winterthur Museum, which has a program in early American culture that's jointly shared with the University of Delaware. And when I finished that, my husband had taken a job at Princeton University, and I was looking for where I could land, and I didn't know what to do. So coming out of colleges at that time, I thought, well, why don't I ask the art history professor here at Princeton? So I spoke to John Wilmerding, who some of you probably know. He's I guess he's probably emeriti today, but professor of American art history. And he suggested that I come down and speak to Morven. So I introduced myself to Martha Wolf, who at the time was the director, and we had a conversation and spoke, and it went from there. But I do remember that after that very first interview, she walked me through the garden here, and people were setting up for Morven in May, which, is such a wonderful event with so much good energy. And it was really a special time for me, and just a great example of everything that Morven does and does so wonderfully. So that's how I got connected here.
Thank you, Anne. And Carol. Carol is the former Assistant Secretary of State and Policy Advisor for the state of New Jersey. Welcome, Carol, and tell us a little bit about how you came to be connected with Morven.
Okay, I came to be connected with Morven a lot earlier than when I was Assistant Secretary. I started my career in state government and constituent relations, and I was assigned the Department of State as one of the things that I would be working on. So the arts and history, all of that came by. And I had driven by here many times when I was in college, but I don't think I had ever stopped in. And the state, I know, owned it at that point, and I guess the Historical Society was here. But as I went through the Kane administration, second term, I always say, last year, I moved on to work for Jane Burgio and Al Felsenberg at the Department of State. And by the end of that year, which was the end of Governor Kane's term, the executive director here left and took a job in another state. So they sent me over here to basically hang out here a couple times a week. And so I actually worked on the second floor, and I would let people in for tours, and there was just a guard and me, and I'd be here 2 or 3 times a week. And that's sort of how I came around to Morven the first time.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like circuitous paths. And I remember that, thinking back now to it was the state police barracks for a while too. I mean, there's so much history here that we could delve into, but which will maybe come up during this. So we talk about the long transitional period after it stopped being the governor's mansion. Considering from both a public and private perspective on this time, what were some of the reasons for the long period of transition, which I think we've already touched on to a certain extent, until opening the museum? Like, what were the challenges? Many, many challenges. One of them I can say right here is that people would go by Morven and say, oh, I've been by there I go by there all the time. What is that place? So, Georgie, you want to start with that?
Well, I think the reason really was the operating structure and money. The Historical Society didn't have the money to support this, and then it was under the aegis of the State Museum, and they didn't have the money, but also what were you going to do with it? I mean, it was a lovely building, it was a historic site, but what were you going to do with it? And so what we did was we figured it out. We got more of a structure, and I think that I have to give the state absolutely full credit. We worked with 3 governors, 3 secretaries of states, 3 treasurers, numerous staff, and we would always go down there and we'd try and get money, and they, hem and haw, but they came through, and I just knew that every dime they spent was going to get back much more in return for the publicity and what it became.
As I said, Georgie kept the vision. Anne, would you like to speak to that?
This is the only one that I think I don't know as much as either of these two, so I'm just going to hand it to Carol.
Carol.
Well, I agree, money, the will to do it, but I'd also say some politics got in the way, especially early on. For instance, as soon as Governor Kane came in, people criticized him for not living in Morven, and they didn't realize that Governor Byrne in '81, which was, Kane was elected in '81, that, he had turned the house over and had made Drumthwacket the official residence. So there was that criticism right away, and Governor Kane loved all things history, but there was that sensitivity. And then they were working on Drumthwacket and did some decorating, and there was a lot of criticism about that. So, which really upset the Kane family, and I think that had a very negative backlash on Morven, because just connected as being another one of the gubernatorial homes. And then when we did finally, Jane Burgio and Al Felsenberg really pushed to get the gardens started, and we really did start a great restoration of the gardens. And then a former First Lady came out and criticized all the holes being dug up in her yard and what's going on, and that became a big political problem. And so, when people thought of Drumthwacket and Morven, they thought, I don't think I want to deal with the press, and frankly, sometimes with the Princeton community on the reaction. And it definitely slowed things down. And then by the time Governor Whitman came in '93, she was elected, in '94 she came in, the budget numbers, we're trying to keep the budget numbers low, and the economy had a recession in the early 90s, so that slowed things down. And that, I think, prolonged how long it took to get Morven up and running.
Yeah. Not to mention the restoration itself, which actually compared to the pre-period was rather speedy, but in terms of,
Surprisingly so.
check my facts, but something like 37 layers of paint were removed. And, you see some of the pictures up here, you scrape and you find something else that's going to go. It was a tedious restoration, but meticulous at the same time.
And there was one other controversy I forgot.
Oh.
When Governor Florio came in, they were going to put the state troopers here.
Yeah, okay.
And they were
yeah.
like measuring the drapes while I was on the second floor.
Yeah.
They were saying, no, that's not going to happen, because the deed says it has to be a governor's mansion or
Right.
a museum.
Yeah.
They said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. And I knew the state troopers because I worked in the State House.
Yeah.
So that became controversial. It made the Trenton Times. It was on NJN. I was looking for the videotape because basically I was let go in the beginning of the Florio administration and was told, well, as long as you're working, you can't say anything about it. I said, well, I was fired this morning, so I guess I'm good. Because I've been a cane person, I'm good. I can go on NJM.
I can say what I want.
Somewhere there's a tape, and I someday maybe I'll find it and get it to you all, but it's basically saying they're moving the troopers into the building. So all through the next 4 years, Governor Florio wasn't inclined to do anything for Morven either. So that set us back again.
He did show up when we had different vets, though. He would always be here.
Yes, he came around, I think.
Yeah. So let's go on to the successful. What were some of the successful decisions or developments of that period that put the site on track to being a museum? Considering also, the choice of when to restore it to, and exhibitions, and keeping to the mission of New Jersey, things like that.
Well,
Georgie, you want to go first?
I think the biggest decision was the brilliant Steve West, who was a lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell and retired and decided he wanted to be in history. And thank heavens he did, because he said if the state owns the building, if the private money is going to be put into it, we want to make sure that you get the private, you keep it separate and get the money back. So he set up a structure called the Lease and Cooperative Agreement. It made the state realize and accept the fact that they owned the building. That was huge. They had an obligation. And then we, the private sector, would cooperate with them, and we'd work together. And that was just critical. Each one had their structure. They knew what their job was. And again, we had to go and plead with them, and but they came through, and it was a big success.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to skip to Carol on this because she probably has the say, and then we can go to Anne for the curatorial part.
Well, I think there were a bunch of things. One thing is that the Whitman administration really did push public-private partnerships. By the time that administration started, I was a policy advisor and a speechwriter, and worked briefly at the Department of State, and public-private partnerships are very much a part of that. So the concept of a public-private partnership, I think, really hit well with the governor. So she was definitely in favor. Yeah. But there were a few little things, and I was going back, and I have just so many pages of memos and papers and things that written from Morven. And one was that there was an issue with the Historic Trust. When we originally went to them looking for a grant, they only gave grants if you would do a long-term lease. So we had to work with the Historic Trust to get an exemption for that, and saying, well, if the state owns the building already, we shouldn't need to do the historic lease, because that made people in Treasury and in the front office skittish, that then they would be committed to something for going forward with the rest of it. So we got the Historic Trust to say that, no, it's okay if there's a state lease, and Harriet Hawkins was the head of the Historic Trust then. And that kind of freed up the money, and of that big money that they had originally, a big portion of it was from the Historic Trust. So Georgie, your name is all over these memos.
Oh, yeah.
I was down there all the time.
Yeah. Vision. Anne, in terms of curatorial and vision for the museum.
So I didn't join Morven until 2003, but after I had interviewed, but before I started, there was a convening that the board and Martha brought together of maybe a dozen of the leading museum professionals and cultural history professionals in the tri-state area. And they got together and grappled with the question of what Morven should be interpreting. And after, I think it was 3 sessions and a lot of opinions and a lot of strong opinions. I got to sit in on these meetings, but I didn't say anything. The decision was made that Morven should interpret its history from the colonial time period through the end of the governor's era, which was January of 1982. And so it's a very layered and complex history, a little bit more than 250 years. And I guess I would say that one of the strengths was the brain trust that was brought together for that.
Oh, thank you, that's interesting. What were some of the first memories, well, Carol already commented on this, you have of the space at Morven before the restoration? And, you know, this is an example, as I was mentioning, of what it looked like. I'll start with, I remember a red carpet in the upstairs of Morven. So, Georgie?
That was one of my first memories. Sitting down at the, sitting in on a board meeting and hearing the furnace go boom, boom, boom. And it was a wonderful old site.
Yeah. Good bones.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, Anne, by the time you came, it was pretty well 2003. Where were we in 2003?
The interior was done, and the exterior had been done, not the grounds yet, or
Okay.
they weren't complete.
Okay.
But I do remember that when I first started the job, one of the first things that I received was, the way that I remember it was about 100 file boxes. I'm sure it probably wasn't 100, but it's been inflated over the years in my memory. About 100 file boxes from the State Museum and then the New Jersey, Historical Society, when they were all running it, and just these boxes upon boxes.
yeah.
And then Martha told me that over on Route 1, we had a rented
Storage
commercial
unit, yeah.
storage unit full of rocks,
Yeah.
which were dug up during the archaeological, we still have them. You have to. I think it's a requirement. So, and I don't mean that facetiously, it actually is a requirement. So these rocks were dug up when Carol was saying there was archaeological
Right.
digs that were in the front yard, and people could see it as they drove past Morven and on their morning commute and things like that. And not everyone was pleased, but I had all of these rocks and all of these boxes. So that's certainly one of my memories. And the other very strong memory I have from the beginning was the potholes in the driveway. Do you guys all remember the potholes?
Yeah.
Years upon years, but it's beautiful now.
Yeah.
They're gone.
Yeah, they found, somebody found a solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the memories from the early years were, you know, when we first, as we said, there was a phased plan, and I hope we're okay on time, am I talking too much? It was phased in, so they decided, which was a good idea, to do the outside first and the wash house, so that the staff who were then housed in the museum could move into the wash house, this outbuilding here. But when we moved in there was no heat or air conditioning. And it was challenging. But I was way younger then, so it's okay, but.
Something Anne said really struck me, because having a brain trust together about what we were going to do with Morven, I think helped move it forward a lot, because as it said, it's sort of been dumped on the State Museum, and I also worked with the State Museum and oversaw them in various times. They weren't crazy about the idea of having this outpost, because they had a lot of needs of their own, and they still have a lot of needs of their own.
Yeah.
So their view, and God bless her, I don't know where she is these days, but Leah Schlossberg used to run the State Museum, and her view was, we will make it just a place for decorative arts. We've got a lot of stuff we can't show. So basically, they just took stuff that they didn't have on there, and they basically prettied up a few rooms, and it was decorative arts, and they didn't necessarily have anything to do with Morven, which I think is where the disconnect was for audiences and why people would come in and see this. So I think the fact that the State Museum dumped all those boxes on you and everything, I think they couldn't wait to get rid of Morven, to be honest with you. I always got that feeling.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about the State Museum, though, is the docents. When you think of one thing that kept this museum going, the docents, led by Betty Coleman, probably none of you don't remember Betty Coleman, but she was just fierce, and she kept those docents in line, and I shouldn't say in line, because she made them love the place. They had meetings, they kept it going when there literally was nothing here, and they'd be giving tours. She was really phenomenal.
And yet they weren't really connected to the museum
No.
in Trenton. They were definitely
For the
about
State Museum.
Princeton
Yeah.
and this building.
Yeah.
And that's what kept the docent corps going, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't find them doing the same thing in Trenton.
Claire,
Yeah.
can I just say
Sure.
two things? I think a big decision was breaking the restoration down into stages.
Yeah.
Did the outside and enabled you to have a staff and then we did the interior, and last were the grounds.
Yeah.
And the gardens. And to the idea that the State Museum just put things here. Brendan Byrne told a great story. He was wonderful. And he lived here, as you know, and he had quite a few children. And he took them, at the time, Morven had furniture from George Washington times. And so one day at church, he handed everybody was sitting in the family was sitting in the front row, and he handed dollar bills down to the children to put in the plate. And one of the sons said, "Dad, who's this on the front of this dollar bill?" And he said, "George Washington." And the little boy said, "You mean the guy that gave us the furniture?" Do we still have it?
Brendan Byrne always had a million stories, as did his children. I'm sorry, I'm losing my place here. When considering, we already talked about this, the exhibitions and the tours, the themes and a drive that drove interpretation was from that brain trust. Women, as we can see throughout Morven's history, have been essential to historic preservation efforts across the country. Our distinguished panel today represents three amazing women who were foundational to Morven's operating as a museum. Who are some of the women who paved the way for you and your career? And they don't have to be related to Morven. Georgie.
Well, I think with regard to Morven, I think Jane Bergio and Leah Schlossberg were really remarkable in their willingness to work with us, and they love the idea of creating this and having the state realize the responsibility of the state and the significance of the house. I think they were, for me, two people.
Anne?
I mean, the two sitting next to me are the two that I think willed Morven into existence, particularly Georgie. So Georgie paved the way, certainly, did an amazing job. I also, this isn't exclusively women, but the board, in the years that I was there, which was 2003 to 10, was phenomenal. It was an exceptional board, really, truly wonderful. And I was thinking over some of the people from there. There's so many, I have a list of 12 or so that I would love to recognize, but I think rather than just reading all their names, I will give a general thank you to the board. I know there's several board members here tonight. What an exceptional job that you guys do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I will echo that. The board over the years, just incredible people that were dedicated, led by Georgie, and just, kind of absorbed that enthusiasm and the vision, and men and women, but many women, as you said, Anne. Carol.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say Georgie and Ted Crane
Ted Crane.
were just continuous presence presences, that's the
Yeah.
word, had a continuous presence on this issue, kept it alive and in front of the governor and in front of the Princeton community, which I really think was monumental. I also think Jane Bergio, for me, was an all-time mentor of, I had the pleasure of working for Jane. I remember being here when we finally broke ground on Morven, and she just, we just had tears in our eyes. She was so happy that it finally happened. And Jane was all things culture, and she's still revered in the arts and history community, particularly the arts community in New Jersey. And then I would have to say Governor Whitman was obviously a mentor of mine, and so pragmatic. I think her behind the scenes, as we would send memos up the chain, and just taking it in bite sizes and just being more realistic about what could be done, because she's extremely pragmatic. And I think that helped ground me for sure. And then I would say Jane Canny, who was the chief of policy and planning, and Eileen McGinnis, who was her deputy and became chief. I remember March, I worked on the campaign. Governor started in January. I started in February. In March of 1994, I sent Jane Canny a memo about Morven, and Jane had also worked in the Kane administration and closely with the Department of State. She wrote back with a little smiley face, "You're relentless." Like, no, she's like, "No, we can't do this right now." Like, "No, we can't do this. This can't be the first thing we do. We have a lot of other things to do." And then I just found memos to Jane and to Eileen, that then would get on up to the governor. And it was the governor who really held Treasury's feet to the fire because of the wonderful, I think we threw in about 100,000 to start the fundraising, and then Georgie and Tad and everybody took it till you had $2 million in private funding for Morven. And at the time, I guess I was acting Secretary of State, and Treasury didn't want to give up. There was like $50,000 short for a contingency fee or something. So I went down to Governor Whitman's office, and I had this little memo, and she wrote on it, I said, "Governor, we just need the 50,000, and then they'll give us $2 million for a building that we own, like that we should be giving the money for." And so she wrote, "Okay, CTW." And then I talked to Treasury. Treasury wrote back, "Oh, we're not doing that." And I picked up my memo with "Okay, CTW" on it, and I walked across the hallway said, "I want to see the treasurer." I think I got to the deputy, or I said, "See this? She just signed this just now, 10 minutes ago. So give us $50,000 and I'll leave you alone. Otherwise, I'm staying right here." And
Great collaboration. Yeah. Where else were you going to get that? I mean, it's just phenomenal.
Then vision, but another word for vision might be relentless, persistent, grit.
Dogged.
yeah, so I have to say Governor Whitman had a lot of women in her cabinet and a lot of women in her sphere. And I think that made things happen. I just think it, without some of them, we wouldn't to move forward. And Jane and Eileen were two of them that really fit the bill there, where they made sure things happened.
That's great. And our final question, what advice would you give to people who are in the early stages of preservation work, whether they're navigating state funding and support, restoring a site, establishing a new museum? That's a tough one, right? Georgie?
Well, I think the first thing is, and the most important thing is, you have to have a vision. You have to have a reason. You have to have a purpose. Why are you establishing this museum, and who's your audience? And of course, the funding is absolutely critical. So you have to have a vision that's going to inspire people beyond just giving. There was somebody that said they listed a consultant. We did a lot of questioning about consultants, what to do and how to do. And one said that out of the 9 different nonprofits that people give to, museums are the second from the last, and the last is a historical society. And so out of that, we got the idea. I mean, Anne was brilliant to get the Boudinot furniture and to set up the first floor. and that stayed for a long time because it was so wonderful. But changing exhibitions, getting people to come in, I think has been really a wonderful thing for Morven.
I was going to mention that a key thing in historic homes, I think people tend to, you go there when you have relatives in town. And that this model of public-private partnership, but a model of, you know, a static downstairs or a somewhat static downstairs, but changing exhibitions it's just a fabulous model. And, you know, it shows today in the growth that this museum has shown. It's such a vibrant institution today. Anne?
I am a big fan of adaptive reuse of historic buildings, so I think that's a great avenue for people to consider rather than making everything, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can go with historic properties. Seeking oral histories early in the process is a nice, very nice thing to have down the road. Being aware of the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation, that's, or standards for the treatment of historic properties, excuse me. That's 4 different categories that are applied to historic buildings, and they each vary with what your use is and how closely you're going to stick to the historic character of the building. And they're very, they are legally binding for buildings that are owned by the government, and then they're morally and philosophically binding for private properties, sometimes legally if you're in a place with an easement. And then there's not a ton of money, as you were saying, for this field, so I would also say that if you were going to start something, you would do it for the love of history, not because it's going to be some big splashy museum, but because you love history.
Thank you. Carol?
I would agree with both of those, that your raison d'etre is very important. And then I would also say your audience is really important. Because we've all worked with people who have a house museum that's very nice, but very tight-knit and insular, and they don't really want to bring a lot of people in. You have to figure out how you can bring people in through your doors and how you can also go out of your doors and involve the community. So I think it's really important to have a community focus. But I'd also say, if you're going to do this, meet everyone. You've got to go out and be the biggest cheerleader for your site that you could possibly be. That includes learning all about all the programs that can help you out there. The state has quite a few. The federal government has a bunch. And I've been on the side where I've been a grant maker, and I've also been on the side where we're getting grants. I'm on the Hunterdon County Cultural and Heritage Commission. We give grants out, but we've also gotten a New Jersey Council for the Humanities grant. We've recently gotten a National Endowment for the Arts grant. You want to be going in both directions if you're not at the top of the food chain. So you really need to know everyone and get to learn all the programs, and not just public-private partnerships, but partnerships with other fields. I really strongly believe the history and arts have to always partner together, that we are one industry, the arts, history, and humanities. And the one place that comes together in New Jersey is with the New Jersey Cultural Trust, and I'm on that board as well, where we give grants for the arts, history, and humanities, and try to make sure that there's a lot of interplay. So as 2026 is coming up, the 250th anniversary, we're already working with a ballet company that does the Leutze painting, and are very excited about that, and we're working with sites, and we're trying to get groups to collaborate as much as possible. We've had grants about that from the trust, but the county level, we're doing that as well, and everyone in the arts community is also excited about the 250th, so collaborate.
Thank you. Those were all great suggestions, and great answers and engagement in our questions. So unless there's anybody else have anything to say, I think we can turn it over to the audience for their questions. Peter.
I joined the board in 2015, which is about a year before Bob Wilson joined and made his changes. And I was sort of wide-eyed and didn't know what I was getting into. And I very quickly got a deep appreciation for Georgie's work in financially and historically preserving Morven and getting it to a position where it could bloom in the future. And you resisted making it what I call the dollhouse syndrome, which is making it a static historical museum. And so today we have this vibrant, multi-exhibit per year organization. And it was very fun being on the board and working with what you had laid down and watching the future happen. So thank you, Georgie.
Oh, that's very nice of you. But I do, you have to give the
I'm missing
staff,
out tons of people, of course.
the
I can't
staff
even-
and the trustees, but you know what the curators have done, it is so exciting and for everybody. I mean, just the Johnson and then the Bell Labs. I mean, New Jersey has such fabulous history. And we just don't get it out there. And we're missing a real opportunity with the anniversary of the revolution. I mean, there's a historic place. I mean, you know, the march up from Princeton and Trenton and everything up to Bedminster. I mean, it's just a no-brainer.
You're on. Anybody else?
I was just going to say on that score, I know Sarah Curator from the New Jersey Historical Commission has been allowed to really beef up her staff. She has over 10
that's
people
great.
working for her now, and it was 10 years ago, it was 2. So there are people in charge of just the 250th and the Black Heritage Trail, and just they really have been giving, Governor Murphy has given $500,000 a year since he's pretty much been in for the 250th as extra funding for the Historical Commission.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
I'm hoping that this time, this anniversary won't pass us by. We did our best for the 350th. And, you know, we had a few things going on, and we were very geared up for 2020 and women's suffrage. We all know how that turned out. So I really am optimistic that there'll be more attention paid to New Jersey on the 250th.
Yeah, thank you.
Just curious, is there any kind of cooperative or anything for the various Princeton historical sites or bodies or whatever that, you've got Drumthwacket, you've got Morven, and you've got the Bainbridge House and Nassau Hall and some of the other stuff. Is there a possibility of working like a group ticket or something like that? Is that?
I know years ago, there was a group that got together of the historical, and then it grew to be cultural institutions. I've been retired for a while now, so I don't know if that exists, but if it is no longer, it certainly would be a good idea. Again, as Carol said, collaborate. But I don't know the answer, and not just.
That's a brilliant, a good
No.
suggestion. And Claire and I went, and I think it's through the state's travel and tourism office. Claire and I got together, we were going out to the travel and tourist office, and we went down the hall and we said, oh, here it is. And we threw the door open, expecting to see a secretary, and we almost hit the desk of the man that was sitting there who was in travel. I do think the state could beef up that department a bit. And then they could organize and get the group, because that's exactly what should happen. Should be a nucleus.
Sometimes the counties organize groups, but I do think Princeton is a big enough area, and they did have that group.
Yeah, PAC, it was just really.
It was a while
Princeton
ago.
Area Arts and Cultural Organization.
Yeah, and I don't know if they still do it. We're all looking at Greer. Do they still do it, Greer?
I'm sorry, I was trying to turn this on. I think it might be. But anyway, I'll speak loudly. So there is an executive director, a group of executive directors from Princeton Arts and Cultural Organizations that meet regularly. And then we also have a group of educators from those same organizations that do meet regularly. So it's nothing formal, it's pretty informal, but we meet, maybe 4 times a year just to stay in touch, and then we have our contact information and all of that. So we're trying, definitely.
Yes.
Short comment. I moved from Manhattan to Princeton 3.5 years ago. For family reasons, so I moved here with my husband. I was crying, I was protesting because in Manhattan people told me that Jersey has nothing. A screaming stage, nothing. and people, they are silly. So, but I found out just such a beautiful stage, just really undersell itself.
I'm a transplanted New Yorker myself, and I definitely am an I love New Jersey person as well. So I feel you, I feel it.
I actually have a question for Anne, and Georgie and Carol, feel free to comment on this as well. What are some of your favorite, early exhibits or events or programs in the kind of early years of Morven right after it opened?
That's easy. You guys know the current curator, Beth Allen. When I left her with an exhibit, which was my absolute favorite, but poor Beth. Rocks and Dinah. It was a grouping of 12 or 15 paintings. They were called murals because they were on the larger side. They were from the Victorian time period. They were used at Princeton University in the geology department to interpret the ages of the earth as they were understood at that time, as it was cutting edge in the Victorian time period. And so we brought them to Morven because they were just a gem of artifacts, and they were big, and we had space, and it was fascinating. And so we brought them over and we exhibited them, and we paired them with some fossils to show modern day scientific interpretation.
These weren't the same fossils that were in storage at the State Museum.
No.
Those were not fossils.
So poor
Beth,
Beth, her
fluorescent rocks, though.
Oh, that's right. Some of them
Fluorescent
fluorescent.
rocks.
Those were from the upstate New Jersey. In some of the Delaware Water Gap has some mining history.
Sterling mining
Sterling,
or
that's
something,
right.
yeah.
Sterling, and there was one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But poor Beth's background was as a Renaissance art historian, and she came, and that was the first exhibit that she had to learn to interpret for the public, and she did beautifully. She did so well, but I don't think she was expecting to be talking about dinosaurs and fossils.
But it was a great draw for kids. It was one of the things we realized was like, okay, this is a way we have to keep this engagement for kids, because the parents brought their kids because rocks and dinos. But it was great. It was a great exhibit. I agree. Can you remember any?
A couple that were favorites of mine, recently, I love the one on the grandfather clocks.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that, and I hunted down Hunterdon County's clocks, and I just thought that was just a great exhibit. And I love the one on the Jersey Shore.
Mm-hmm. The
That was
Impressionists?
really, I'm from Monmouth County originally, and still family down there, and that one was really lovely. I really liked that one.
Yeah, there's been some really wonderful exhibits that, the flags, we had flags, and that's how we found our dear Richard Pierce as a trustee. He
those are
saved
great.
us. We had lost our funding in 2008, right when I became executive director. Thought it was going to be a great job, but Richard saved us, right? I mean, it was a wonderful exhibit. It was perfect for Morven. It fit its mission. It opened around 4th of July, as I recall. So it was. Anybody, any other questions? Oh, yeah, sorry, Georgie.
Well, I don't remember a favorite then. I mean, of course, I loved the furniture and the idea that we had the Boudinats. I liked all the big family pictures of them riding on horses and going by. I thought it added, I think the family is very interesting.
Yeah.
The Stocktons, and then the Johnsons are very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I've enjoyed that. But the Bell Labs, oh my gosh, that was just wonderful, wonderful.
The pole farm tour.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think how we're raising knowledge of New Jersey culture and history. I think it's
And there's an endless, I was amazed, as not coming from an art or cultural background, at the number of little seeds that you can take and blow into, an exhibit. I mean, it's astonishing, like Rocks and Dinos or Lindbergh. Lindbergh was, Jesse can speak to that one. So I think there's just and there's so much more, they've talked about football, the Rutgers and football. There's just a whole, Liza, I'm sure there's that, a lot of ideas that are still to be presented, so.
Every day when I'm reading the paper, the first front page, always it comes up that somehow this story has a connection with New Jersey. Whether they were born, I mean, just look at when you read the paper, you say, oh my gosh, everything.
We all have to be evangelizers for New Jersey.
That's what they say about the core curriculum standards. And we will remember this, having worked with Sarah Curator. She always says that everything in history, in American history, can be taught through a lens of New Jersey because it mostly all happened here first, or we have a very strong connection to it. So everything, and their curriculum guides, and I have to plug It Happened Here, New Jersey, which is still those 3-minute videos that are still on their website in their archives, are wonderful videos. And I'm always telling people, if you have an exhibit on Lindbergh, they should be showing that video. If you have anything, just keep show that video. We didn't get to finish it because we ran out of money for the 350th, but we probably have 50 different videos, from Paul Robeson and Frank Sinatra to Bell Labs to the 10 Crucial Days, and Greer will remember all this.
Anybody else? Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. This was really great. Yeah, thank you. Keep coming back and tell your friends.
The subordinate was won by volunteers. The battle of the Pacific against the Japanese was won by radar, which is